My fiancé stood in his family's marble-floored estate, surrounded by old money and older judgments, and laughed when his mother asked about my little trust fund. When I stayed silent, he smirked and said, "Come on, Grace, don't be modest. Tell them about your cute inheritance. What was it, enough for a down payment on a condo?" His family joined in the laughter, assuming I was some middle-class girl trying to marry up. So I showed them exactly who they were dealing with, and watched their entire world collapse in real time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Grace Levine, and the moment I'm about to describe happened exactly 3 weeks before what should have been my wedding day. But to understand how I ended up standing in the Devon family's Connecticut estate being mocked for my supposed poverty, you need to understand who I actually am, and more importantly, who they thought I was. At 29, I'm a senior acquisitions manager at Hartwell Global, a private equity firm that most people have never heard of because we prefer it that way. The truly wealthy don't need name recognition. My job? I evaluate companies for acquisition. Basically, I read balance sheets, dig through their financials, and figure out if they're worth the 8 or 9 figures my clients want to invest. I'm good at it. Exceptional, actually. My mentor, Patricia Hartwell, once told me I have an instinct for seeing value where others see risk, and for spotting red flags that others miss entirely. Last year, I identified a manufacturing company in Ohio that everyone else passed on. 6 months after we acquired it, we'd tripled its value. My commission alone was more than most people make in 5 years. But here's the thing about my life: I don't look like money. I don't dress like it, don't talk about it, don't display it. My daily uniform is simple: black pants, white silk blouses, minimal jewelry. I drive a 7-year-old Volvo that's perfectly maintained but thoroughly unremarkable. I live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn that I rent, not own, despite being able to buy the entire building in cash if I wanted to. This isn't some quirky personality trait or false modesty. It's strategy. In my line of work, I've learned that people reveal their true nature when they think you have nothing they want. They get careless. Honest. Real. The moment they know you have money, everything changes. Suddenly everyone's performing, positioning, calculating what they can gain from proximity to your wealth. So when I met Robert Devon 2 years ago at a charity gala, one of the few social events I couldn't avoid, I made a choice. He was charming, handsome, from a family whose name appeared on museum wings and hospital buildings. When he asked what I did, I told him I worked in corporate finance. True, but vague. When he asked where I lived, I told him Brooklyn. True, but he assumed a rent-controlled studio, not a choice. Robert came from the kind of family that counted their money in generations, not dollars. His great-grandfather had made a fortune in shipping, his grandfather had expanded into real estate, and his father, William Devon, now managed the family's diversified portfolio from their Connecticut estate. They were comfortable, established, secure in their position among the northeastern elite. Robert worked at his father's firm in a position that was more title than responsibility. He showed up to meetings, signed documents his father prepared, and spent most of his time networking at country clubs and charity events. He was nice enough, funny, attentive in the early months. He seemed to appreciate that I had my own career, my own life, my own identity beyond being someone's girlfriend. When he proposed 18 months into our relationship with his grandmother's ring, a modest 2-carat diamond that his mother presented like it was the crown jewels, I said yes. Not because I loved him desperately, I'm honest enough to admit that now. But because he seemed safe. Uncomplicated. The kind of man who wouldn't try to change me or control me or make demands I couldn't meet. His family had been polite to me throughout our relationship, if somewhat distant. His mother, Caroline Devon, had that particular wasp reserve that could make a compliment sound like an insult. "How industrious of you to work in finance," she'd said at our first dinner, the word industrious carrying just enough emphasis to remind me that women in her circle didn't need to work at all. But there were moments, small moments I noticed but didn't quite process at the time. The way Robert would change the subject when I mentioned a significant deal at work. How he'd introduce me at his family's events as Grace, she works in finance, with a slight apologetic tone, as if my career was something to be explained away rather than celebrated. The time his mother asked what my parents did and looked genuinely confused when I said my father had been a high school math teacher before he passed. They'd created an entire narrative about me in their minds. The hard-working middle-class girl who'd caught the eye of their son. Someone who would be grateful for entry into their world, who would understand what a privilege it was to marry into the Devon family, who would know her place. 3 weeks before the wedding, Caroline insisted on hosting an intimate family dinner at their estate. Just immediate family, she'd said. Robert's parents, his sister Anya and her husband Quinn Spencer, and me. A chance for the families to bond before the wedding chaos began. I should have known better. I should have recognized the setup. But I'd gotten comfortable in my deception, secure in my choice to keep my wealth private. I had no idea that dinner would be the night everything changed. The Devon estate sat on 12 acres in Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of property that whispered old money rather than screamed it. Stone facade dating back to the 1920s, perfectly manicured grounds that required a full-time gardening staff, a circular driveway that could accommodate a dozen cars without feeling crowded. The interior smelled like old wood and expensive candles, that particular scent wealthy families cultivated to suggest history and permanence. Robert and I had been dating for 2 years total when Caroline insisted on this dinner. I'd visited the estate maybe a dozen times. Each visit followed the same pattern. Caroline would greet us at the door with air kisses that never quite touched skin. William would offer Robert and Quinn drinks in his study while discussing business I wasn't invited to join, and Anya would make small talk about wedding planning with the enthusiasm of someone discussing dental work. Let me back up to how Robert and I actually met, because that context matters. The charity gala was for pediatric cancer research, one of the causes Hartwell Global supported publicly. Patricia insisted I attend as the firm's representative. I wore a simple black dress, nothing designer, nothing that screamed money. My only jewelry was my grandmother's pearl earrings, valuable to me but unremarkable to anyone else. Robert approached me at the bar, drinking scotch and looking slightly bored. When he smiled, it seemed genuine. Not the calculated networking smile I saw constantly in my work, but something warm and real. These events are torture, he'd said, leaning against the bar beside me. 3 hours of small talk with people whose names I'll forget by tomorrow. I'd laughed despite myself. Then why come? Family obligation. My mother sits on the board. You? Work obligation. My boss sits on the board. What followed was easy conversation. He was funny, self-deprecating about his privileged upbringing in a way that felt honest rather than performative. When he asked for my number, I gave it to him. When he called 2 days later to invite me to dinner, I said yes. The first 6 months were good. Robert was attentive without being overwhelming. He respected my work schedule, never complained when I had to cancel plans for client emergencies. He introduced me to his family early, maybe too early, at a Sunday brunch at the estate. Caroline had looked me over with the assessment of someone examining a potential purchase. Grace Levine, she'd repeated, as if testing how the names sounded. And what do your parents do, dear? My father was a high school math teacher, I'd said. He passed away 5 years ago. My mother was a nurse. She's retired now, living in Florida. The temperature in the room dropped perceptibly. I watched Caroline and William exchange a look that said everything they were too polite to speak aloud. Teacher. Nurse. Not their world. Not their class. Robert had squeezed my hand under the table, trying to be reassuring, but he hadn't corrected their assumptions. Hadn't said anything to shift the narrative they were already constructing about who I was and why I was dating their son. That should have been my first real warning sign. Over the following months, I met more of Robert's world. Country club dinners where I was introduced as Robert's girlfriend from Brooklyn. Charity events where Caroline would steer me toward conversations with other, working women, while she socialized with the wives who didn't need employment. Family gatherings where Anya would ask with saccharine sweetness how I was managing to save for the wedding on a finance salary. I let them believe their narrative. partly because I was curious to see how far they'd take their assumptions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Partly because I told myself it didn't matter, I was marrying Robert, not his family. And partly because some small part of me wanted to see how they treated someone they perceived as beneath them. I was collecting data, the way I did in acquisitions. Observing behavior, noting patterns, building a complete picture before making any decisions. What I didn't realize was that Robert wasn't just allowing their narrative, he was actively constructing it. The cracks started small, hairline fractures I noticed but rationalized away. 6 months into our relationship, Robert suggested I give up my Brooklyn rental and move into his condo in Tribeca. It's bigger, better location, and honestly, Grace, you're throwing money away on that rent. His condo was nice, 2 bedrooms, renovated kitchen, doorman building. The kind of place a successful young professional would live. But it was also clearly decorated by his mother, all neutral tones and safe choices, nothing personal or distinctive. I like my neighborhood, I'd said. I've built a life there. In Brooklyn? He'd laughed. Come on, you're just being stubborn. This makes practical sense. Practical sense for whom, I'd wondered. For me, losing independence? Or for him, having his girlfriend conveniently located in his space, on his terms? I'd declined. He'd pouted for a week before dropping it. The wedding planning revealed more cracks. Caroline had opinions about everything, the venue, the guest list, my dress, the flowers. Every suggestion I made was met with gentle redirection. The plaza is so much more appropriate for a Devon wedding than that boutique hotel you mentioned, dear. Perhaps a more traditional dress? That modern style is a bit unconventional for our family. Robert never pushed back. Never defended my preferences. Just smiled and said, Mother knows best about these things. I wanted 75 guests, close friends, essential family, key colleagues. Caroline's additions brought the total past 300. These are important relationships, she'd explained. The Spencers, the Christies, the Reeds, these families have been connected to ours for generations. I'd looked at Robert. Do you even know half these people? It's just how these things work, Grace. Family weddings are social obligations as much as personal celebrations. That's when I should have recognized what was happening. This wasn't a wedding, it was a performance. A public demonstration of the Devon family's social standing, with me as the prop representing Robert's choice to marry someone appropriately grateful for the opportunity. 2 months before the wedding, I had dinner with my best friend Julie Marquet in the West Village. We'd met at Columbia Business School, and she was one of exactly 7 people who knew the full extent of my finances. Are you actually happy? Julie had asked over wine at a quiet bistro. I'm fine. Why? You don't seem excited about this wedding. You seem tolerant of it. I'd considered lying, then didn't. His family is a lot. They don't know, do they? About your actual situation? No. Julie had studied me carefully. Why not? Because I wanted to see who Robert really was when he thought I had nothing but myself to offer. And what have you learned? I'd taken a long sip of wine before answering. That he's exactly who his family raised him to be. Someone who values appearance over substance. Someone who needs me to be less so he can feel like more. Then why are you marrying him? It was the question I'd been avoiding. The truth was complicated. Robert was safe. Uncomplicated. He wasn't trying to access my money because he didn't know it existed. He seemed content with who he thought I was, a hard-working finance professional punching above her weight by landing him. I'd told myself that was enough. That I could build a life with someone who saw me as a slightly aspirational catch rather than a financial target. I was wrong. The dinner that changed everything happened on a Saturday evening in early October. 3 weeks before the wedding, which was scheduled for October 28th at the Plaza, Caroline's choice, naturally. I drove to Greenwich after a particularly brutal week at work. We'd just closed a pharmaceutical acquisition worth $200 million, and I'd spent 70 hours finalizing due diligence. I was exhausted, looking forward to a quiet evening. I should have known better. When I arrived, there were more cars in the circular drive than Robert had mentioned. His parents, obviously. Anya and Quinn. But also another couple I didn't recognize, a silver Mercedes with Massachusetts plates. Robert met me at the door, kissing my cheek. Grace, perfect timing. Come meet the Christies, Paul and Carrie. Old family friends, just got back from their summer house in Nantucket. Old family friends who just happened to be here for our intimate family dinner. Another surprise guest addition I hadn't been warned about. Paul Christie was in his early 30s, investment banking from the way he carried himself, that particular confidence that came from moving large sums of other people's money. Carrie was polished in the way Caroline was polished, every detail considered, nothing left to chance. We gathered in the formal living room for cocktails. The room smelled like wood smoke and expensive perfume. I took a glass of wine from the server, because of course Caroline had staff for a family dinner, and sat down in a wingback chair by the fireplace. The conversation started innocuously enough. Weather, upcoming holidays, someone's recent trip to Europe. I participated minimally, content to observe. Then Caroline turned to me with that smile that never quite reached her eyes. Grace, dear, Anya was just telling us about your registry choices. How practical. Anya jumped in immediately. I was surprised you registered at Crate and Barrel instead of somewhere more upscale. I mean, for a Devon family wedding. I chose stores where our actual friends could afford to shop. Not everyone has unlimited budgets for wedding gifts. Of course, Caroline said smoothly. How thoughtful of you to consider your guests' financial limitations. The condescension was expertly delivered. Sympathetic tone, insulting substance. Paul Christie leaned forward, swirling his scotch. Robert mentioned you work in corporate finance. Which firm? Hartwell Global. His eyebrows rose slightly. I don't think I know them. Boutique firm? Private equity. We prefer to maintain a low profile. Ah, one of those smaller funds. Very sensible career choice. Steady, reliable income. He said it the way someone might compliment a solid Honda Civic, practical, but nothing to get excited about. I watched Robert, waiting for him to correct the assumption, to mention that Hartwell Global managed over $12 billion in assets. He said nothing. Just sipped his drink and smiled blandly. William Devon joined the conversation. Robert tells us you have a trust fund. Very responsible of your parents to plan ahead like that. My spine straightened slightly. This was new territory. I'm sorry, what? Your trust fund, William repeated. Robert mentioned your father set one up before he passed. Smart man, ensuring his daughter would be taken care of. I turned to Robert slowly. His face had gone red. I might have mentioned something like that. When did you mention that? Since my father never set up any trust fund. The room went very quiet. Caroline recovered first, her social training kicking in. Oh, well, Robert must have misunderstood. These financial matters can be so confusing. There's nothing to misunderstand. My father was a high school math teacher. He had a pension and a small life insurance policy. There was no trust fund. Anya laughed, that particularly cruel laugh that some women perfect in private schools. Well, that's awkward. Robert's been telling everyone you have family money. That you're being modest about it because you don't like to flaunt wealth. I looked directly at Robert. Why would you tell people that? He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his mother. I thought it would make things easier. Mother was concerned about the optics of me marrying someone without. I mean, someone from a different financial background. The optics. You have to understand, Robert continued, his voice taking on a pleading quality. It's embarrassing for me. Paul here manages a $50 million portfolio. Quinn's family owns half of Boston. And I'm marrying a girl from Brooklyn who works for some company nobody's heard of. The words hung in the air like smoke. Embarrassing for him. Caroline stepped in quickly. What Robert means is that we've always expected he would marry someone from a similar background. Someone who understands our world, our obligations, our social position. Someone with money. Well, yes, dear. That's rather the point of our social circle, isn't it? Maintaining appropriate connections. I set my wine glass down on the mahogany side table with deliberate care. My hands were steady. Years of high-stakes negotiations had taught me to control my physical responses even when my mind was calculating 10 moves ahead. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. Robert told all of you that I have family money. A trust fund that doesn't exist. Because he was embarrassed to admit he's marrying someone he perceives as poor. That's not exactly, Robert started. And none of you thought to verify this information with me directly. You just accepted it as fact and built an entire narrative around it. Carrie Christie shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. Paul had gone very still, his investment banker instincts probably warning him that something had just shifted in the room's power dynamics. William cleared his throat. Grace, I think you're overreacting to what was simply a misunderstanding. I'm not finished. William Devon actually stopped talking. I could see the surprise flash across his face. Apparently, women in his world didn't interrupt men mid-sentence. Robert, I'm curious. This trust fund story. How much did you tell them I had? Robert's face was now fully red. Does it matter? Humor me. I said maybe 3 or 4 million. Enough to be respectable. Enough that they wouldn't think you were marrying me for money. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sound came out sharp and cold. 3 or 4 million. That's what you needed me to have to not be embarrassed. Grace, you're making this into a bigger deal than it is, Anya interjected. Robert was just trying to help you fit in. You should be grateful he was managing his family's concerns about. About what? About me being a gold digger? About me not being good enough for your precious brother? Well, yes, frankly. Anya's politeness was cracking. You work in finance, which is fine, but you're clearly not at Robert's level. You live in Brooklyn in a rental apartment. You drive a car that's practically vintage. We needed assurance that you weren't just after the Devon family money. Quinn, Anya's husband, put a warning hand on her arm, but she shook it off. And honestly, she continued, this whole act you're putting on right now? The righteous indignation? It's a bit much. So Robert exaggerated about your finances. He was trying to make you look better to his family. You should be thanking him. The room was completely silent except for the crackling fire. Everyone was watching me, waiting to see how I'd respond to being put in my place by a woman who'd never worked a day in her life. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. You want to talk about finances, Anya? Let's talk about finances. I pulled out my phone. I'm curious about something. What do you think my salary is at Hartwell Global? I don't know. 80,000? Maybe 100 if you're senior. Robert? I turned to my fiancé. What did you tell them I make? He was staring at the floor. Around that. Maybe 120 with bonuses. $120,000. That's what you think I earn annually. It's a respectable salary for someone in your position, Caroline said carefully, clearly trying to de-escalate. Nothing to be ashamed of. I pulled up my banking app. Navigated to my primary checking account and turned the screen toward them. This is my checking account. Just the checking account I use for monthly expenses. Current balance, $473,000. Carrie Christie actually gasped. Paul leaned forward to look more closely at the screen, his professional instincts overriding his social ones. That's not possible, Robert said weakly. I swiped to another screen. My grandmother left me $37 million when I was 25. I've been managing it myself ever since. Swipe. This is my primary investment account. Current value, $21.4 million. Swipe. This is my real estate portfolio. I own 4 properties outright. Combined value, approximately $12 million. The silence in the room had a different quality now. Shock. Confusion. The dawning realization that something fundamental had just shifted. My annual compensation last year was $3.2 million. My commission on the pharmaceutical deal we closed on Thursday was $850,000. William Devon looked like someone had punched him. Caroline's practiced composure had completely cracked. Anya's mouth was literally hanging open. So no, Anya. I'm not after your family's money. I have more money than all of you combined. Paul Christie recovered first, his brain immediately recalibrating. Hartwell Global. Patricia Hartwell's firm. You're that Grace Levine. The Grace Levine who identified the Meridian manufacturing opportunity. That's correct. Jesus Christ. That deal was legendary. You turned a $16 million investment into over $200 million in 22 months. I did. William found his voice next, though it had lost its earlier condescension. You've been pretending to be poor this entire time? I haven't been pretending anything. I've been living my life quietly, which is how I prefer it. I never lied about my finances. I simply didn't volunteer information that was none of your business. I looked at each of them in turn. All of you made assumptions based on my father's profession, my mother's career, where I chose to live. You saw what you wanted to see. But why? Caroline's voice was barely above a whisper. Why would you hide this from us? From Robert? Because I wanted to know who Robert really was when he thought I had nothing but myself to offer. I turned to my fiancé, who still hadn't spoken since my revelation. And now I know. You're a man who lies to his family because the truth embarrasses you. A man who needs me to have money so you don't feel humiliated marrying me. A man who just called me a girl from Brooklyn like it was an insult. Grace, Robert finally looked up at me. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it, exactly? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. The charming, confident man I'd been dating for 2 years had completely disappeared, replaced by someone who looked genuinely lost. Anya had recovered enough to go on the offensive. So this was what? Some kind of test? You were playing with us this entire time? I was observing. There's a difference. You made fools of us. No, Anya. You made fools of yourselves. I gave you every opportunity to treat me with basic respect regardless of what you thought my bank account looked like. You chose not to. Quinn spoke for the first time, his voice thoughtful. The apartment in Brooklyn. The old Volvo. The modest jewelry. That's all deliberate. Of course it is. I learned early in my career that the moment people know you have money, they stop showing you who they really are. They perform. They position. They calculate. I prefer authenticity to performance. Authenticity, Caroline repeated, her voice hardening now that the initial shock was wearing off. You lecture us about authenticity while running a 2-year deception? I never lied to any of you. Not once. You asked what my parents did, I told you. You asked where I lived, I told you. You asked about my work, I told you I was in corporate finance at Hartwell Global. Every single thing I told you was completely true. It's not my fault you didn't bother to research what that actually meant. Paul Christie pulled out his phone, clearly searching for something. After a moment, he let out a low whistle. Hartwell Global. $12 billion in assets under management. Senior management team includes. He looked up at me. You're listed as Senior Managing Director. The only person under 40 in the firm's leadership. I earned that position. I have no doubt. Paul's tone carried genuine respect now. The question is, What are you doing marrying someone who works a vanity position at his father's firm? The comment landed like a bomb. Robert shot to his feet. Excuse me? Paul, Carrie said warningly. But Paul wasn't backing down. I'm just saying what everyone in this room is thinking now. She's a titan in private equity. You're. He gestured vaguely at Robert. You're exactly what she said. A man who was embarrassed of her because he thought she was poor. That's not fair, Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. I stood, collecting my purse. I'm leaving. Grace, wait. Robert moved toward me. We need to talk about this. You can't just drop this information and walk out. Actually, I can. I need space to think about whether I want to marry someone who found me embarrassing. I never said you were embarrassing. You said it was embarrassing for you that I worked for a company nobody knew. That your friends had more money than your fiancé. Those were your exact words, Robert. Caroline stood as well. Grace, please. Let's all calm down and discuss this rationally. There's nothing to discuss right now. I need time to process that my fiancé has been lying to his family about my finances because the truth made him feel inferior. I walked out of the Devon estate without looking back. My hands were shaking by the time I reached my car, not from fear or sadness, but from pure adrenaline. The surgical precision of that revelation, the looks on their faces, the way their entire worldview had shattered in the span of 10 minutes. My phone exploded with calls before I even hit the highway. Robert's name flashing on the screen over and over. I declined every single one. By the time I pulled into my building's parking garage, I had 17 missed calls from Robert, 4 from Caroline, and 3 text messages. Robert, Grace, please answer. We need to talk about this. Robert, you're being completely unreasonable. I was trying to protect you. Caroline, Grace, dear, I think we all said things in the heat of the moment. Let's meet tomorrow and discuss this calmly. I turned my phone on Do Not Disturb and went upstairs to my apartment. The space felt different now, like I was seeing it through their eyes. The modest 2-bedroom with its IKEA furniture and walls I'd never bothered to paint. They'd walked through here once, early in the relationship, and I remembered Caroline's barely concealed disdain. How cozy, she'd said, the way someone might compliment a child's drawing. I'd chosen this apartment deliberately. Chose everything in my life deliberately. The old but reliable car. The simple clothes. The quiet neighborhood. All of it designed to let me move through the world without attracting attention, without being treated differently because of my net worth. But Robert had been embarrassed by these choices. Had felt the need to lie to his family because my deliberately modest lifestyle reflected poorly on him. I poured myself a glass of wine and started making notes like I would for any big business decision: facts, evidence, options, consequences. My phone buzzed with a new text. Robert again, I'm coming to your apartment. We need to talk face to face. I responded immediately, no. You're not welcome here right now. Robert, Grace, you're my fiancé. You can't just shut me out. Watch me. Robert, this is insane. So I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Can we please act like adults? The audacity of that message, calling me childish for needing space after discovering my fiancé had been lying about me for 2 years, made me set the phone down before I threw it across the room. 20 minutes later, my building's doorman called. Ms. Levine, there's a Robert Devon here to see you. Should I send him up? No, Marcus. Mr. Devon is not on my approved visitor list. Please ask him to leave. He's insisting he needs to speak with you. Tell him if he doesn't leave voluntarily, you'll call the police for trespassing. There was a pause. Understood, Ms. Levine. 5 minutes later, another text from Robert. You're really going to have your doorman threaten me with police? Over a misunderstanding? That word. Misunderstanding. As if his casual cruelty, his lies, his fundamental disrespect for who I actually was could be dismissed as a simple miscommunication. I called Julie. She answered on the first ring. Grace? What's wrong? I told her everything. The dinner, the revelation, Robert's attempts to show up at my apartment. When I finished, there was a long silence. Please tell me you're calling off this wedding. I don't know yet. I need to think. Grace. Listen to me. This man was embarrassed by you. He lied to his family about who you are because the truth made him feel inferior. What exactly is there to think about? 2.5 years, Jules. We've been together for 2.5 years. 2.5 years of him treating you like someone he had to make excuses for. 2.5 years of you testing him, and him failing spectacularly. Her voice softened. You already know what you need to do. You're just processing. She was right. I did know. But knowing and accepting were different things. The next morning, I woke to find my phone had exploded overnight. 43 missed calls. 27 text messages. And one voicemail that made my blood run cold. It was from Caroline, her voice dripping with calculated warmth. Grace, darling, I've been thinking about our conversation last night. I believe we got off on the wrong foot. Why don't you come to the estate tomorrow afternoon? Just you and me. Let's talk woman to woman about how we move forward from this little misunderstanding. I'm sure we can find a way to make this work for everyone. Little misunderstanding. Make this work for everyone. The subtext was crystal clear. Now that they knew I had money, everything had changed. I didn't respond to Caroline's voicemail. Instead, I did what I always did when facing a major decision. I gathered data. Monday morning, I called Patricia Hartwell. Grace, she answered on the second ring. You sound tense. What's wrong? I gave her the abbreviated version. The dinner, the revelation, Robert's lies. Patricia was quiet for a moment. The Devon family. William Devon runs Devon Capital Management, correct? Yes. Hold on. I heard keyboard clicks. Devon Capital. Founded by William's father in 1962. Current assets under management, approximately 400 million. Respectable, but not exceptional. Performance has been mediocre for the past decade. They're coasting on reputation more than results. Why are you telling me this? Because you need context. The Devon family isn't nearly as wealthy as they pretend to be. They're comfortable, certainly, but they're not in the same stratosphere as you. William's been making some questionable investment decisions lately. There was a commercial real estate deal last year that went sideways, lost about 30 million in investor capital. Word in the industry is that he's been increasingly desperate to maintain appearances while the actual financial foundation crumbles. My stomach dropped. You think they knew about my money before last night? I think it's possible someone did their homework. Grace, you're not as invisible as you think you are. Your name is on Hartwell Global's website. Your compensation is a matter of public record in some of our SEC filings. Anyone with basic research skills could figure out what you're worth. Robert wouldn't. Wouldn't he? Grace, you're brilliant at reading companies. But you have a blind spot when it comes to reading people who claim to love you. The observation stung because it was accurate. I'd spent 2 years testing Robert, watching him, collecting data. But I'd been testing whether he'd treat me well when he thought I was poor. I'd never considered that he might have known the truth all along. Do some digging, Patricia said gently. Before you make any decisions. Find out what Robert actually knew and when he knew it. I spent the rest of Monday becoming someone I'd never wanted to be, the suspicious fiancé checking up on her partner. I started with the basics, going through Robert's laptop while he was at work. We'd exchanged passwords early in the relationship, one of those gestures of trust that now felt naive. His browser history was meticulously cleared. Suspicious in itself. But he'd forgotten about his email. I found it in a folder marked Personal, Archive. An email from his mother, dated 3 weeks after Robert and I started dating. Robert, I've done some research on Grace Levine. I'm forwarding you the article from Financial Times about the Meridian deal. She was the lead on that acquisition. This woman is not some mid-level finance worker. She's a managing director at one of the most successful PE firms in the country. Her compensation last year was likely in the millions. Why is she pretending otherwise? This seems like a red flag to me. We need to discuss this at Sunday dinner. My hands were shaking as I opened Robert's response. Mother, I'm aware of Grace's position. She's been upfront with me about her career. I just haven't shared all the details with you because I wanted you to get to know her as a person first, not as a financial prospect. She clearly values her privacy, and I'm respecting that. Let's not make this a big deal. I sat back, processing. So Caroline had known from the beginning. Had done research, found out exactly who I was. And Robert had known that she knew. But he'd still let his family treat me like someone marrying up. Had actively participated in the narrative that I was some middle-class girl who'd gotten lucky landing a Devon. Why? I kept digging. Found more emails, a whole thread between Robert and his sister Anya. Anya, so the Brooklyn girlfriend is secretly loaded? This is hilarious. When are you going to tell her you know? Robert, I'm not. She clearly doesn't want people to know about her money. If I acknowledge it, she'll know I've been researching her, and that breaks the trust. Anya, or you could just be honest. Novel concept, I know. Robert, this works better. She thinks I love her for who she is, not what she has. I look like the good guy who doesn't care about money. Win-win. Anya, you're playing a dangerous game, little brother. Robert, it's only dangerous if she finds out. I read that last line 3 times. It's only dangerous if she finds out. I took screenshots of everything. Every email, every text thread between Robert and his family, every piece of evidence that showed they'd known about my wealth from the beginning. Then I forwarded them all to my personal email and cleared the browsing history on Robert's laptop, leaving no trace that I'd discovered his deception. My phone rang. Robert's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message. Grace, I know you're angry, but you need to understand something. I was trying to protect you. My family can be intense about money. I thought if they believed you had some family wealth, they'd accept you more easily. That's all this was. Please, can we just talk? I love you. This doesn't have to end our relationship. I love you. The words felt hollow now, performative. A line he'd practiced because he thought it was what I needed to hear. I called Julie back. I need your legal contact. The one who handles prenuptial agreements. Grace Levine, you are not seriously still considering marrying this man. No. But I need to understand my legal position before I move forward. Move forward with what? I'm still deciding. Julie gave me the name of Alicia Reed, a family law attorney who specialized in high-net-worth divorces and prenuptial agreements. I called her immediately. Alicia's voice was crisp and professional. Ms. Levine, Julie mentioned you might be reaching out. What can I do for you? I need to understand something. If I marry someone who's been deliberately deceptive about their knowledge of my finances, do I have any legal recourse if the marriage fails? That depends on several factors. Do you have a prenuptial agreement in place? No. Robert refused to sign one. Said it showed a lack of trust. Alicia made a thoughtful sound. And now you know why. Ms. Levine, in New York State, without a prenup, your assets acquired during the marriage become marital property subject to equitable distribution. That means he could potentially claim a portion of everything you earn while married, even if those earnings come from your pre-existing career and relationships. Even if he's been lying to me about his knowledge of my finances? Deception is difficult to prove in court, and even if proven, it doesn't necessarily invalidate a marriage or property claims. My advice? Don't marry him. But if you're determined to proceed, get a prenup immediately. And document everything you just told me about his deception. I already have. Emails, texts, the whole timeline. Smart. Keep those safe. And Ms. Levine? Whatever you're planning, make sure you're protecting yourself first. I spent the next 3 days working from home, avoiding Robert's increasingly desperate attempts to contact me. He showed up at my apartment building twice more. Marcus, my doorman, turned him away both times. On Wednesday, I received an unexpected call from William Devon. Grace, I apologize for calling directly, but you haven't been responding to Robert or Caroline's messages. I was hoping we could speak frankly, one professional to another. I'm listening. I'll be direct. We made assumptions about you that were incorrect. We treated you disrespectfully, and for that, I apologize. But you have to understand our position. Robert is our only son. We want to ensure his future is secure. His future is secure, Mr. Devon. He has a trust fund, a position at your firm, and more privilege than 99% of the population. Yes, but Grace. William's voice dropped. You're in a position to understand portfolio management. You know that markets fluctuate, that nothing is guaranteed. Having a wife with substantial assets provides a safety net. The honesty was almost refreshing. So you want me to marry your son to be his financial safety net? I want my son to marry someone who can ensure the Devon family legacy continues, regardless of market conditions. You want me to subsidize your family's lifestyle while pretending it's love. I want you to recognize that this could be mutually beneficial. You get a respectable family name with social connections. Robert gets stability. Everyone wins. Except I don't need your family name or your social connections, Mr. Devon. I have my own reputation, my own network, my own success. What exactly do I gain from this arrangement? William was quiet for a long moment. Perhaps I've miscalculated. Perhaps you have. He hung up without another word. That evening, I finally called Robert. He answered before the first ring finished. Grace, thank God. I've been losing my mind. Can I see you? Please. Tomorrow. 2 p.m. at the cafe near my apartment. We'll talk then. Should I be worried? I thought about his emails. About his mother's research. About his father's frank admission that they saw me as a financial resource. About 2 years of performance and calculation masked as love. Yes, Robert. You should be very worried. I hung up before he could respond. That night, I opened my laptop and started making a list. Not just of Robert's deceptions, but of every moment over the past 2 years when I'd felt small, managed, condescended to. Every time Caroline had made a cutting remark about my immodest lifestyle. Every time Anya had suggested I should be grateful for their acceptance. Every time Robert had introduced me as his girlfriend, from Brooklyn, with that apologetic tone. I'd spent 2 years collecting data. Now it was time to present my findings. I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. Chose a table in the back corner with clear sight lines to the entrance. Old habits from too many tense business negotiations, always control the environment, always see who's coming. Robert arrived exactly at 2 p.m., looking haggard. His usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, his shirt wrinkled. He'd clearly been sleeping poorly, which gave me a small, petty sense of satisfaction. He slid into the chair across from me, reaching for my hand. I pulled it back. Grace, please. Can we just... I found the emails, Robert. The color drained from his face. What emails? The ones between you and your mother. The ones between you and Anya. The ones where you all discussed my actual net worth 3 weeks after we started dating. I kept my voice level, clinical. You've known who I really am from the beginning. All of you have. Robert's mouth opened and closed. I can explain. You told Anya it was only dangerous if I found out. That's a direct quote from your email. It's only dangerous if she finds out. You went through my laptop? His voice rose slightly. That's a massive violation of privacy. You're really going to play the victim here? After 2 years of lying to me? I didn't lie. I just didn't correct your assumption that we didn't know. That's called lying by omission, Robert. And you did it deliberately. You calculated that I'd be more likely to stay with you if I thought you loved me despite my perceived poverty. You played a role for 2 years. He ran his hands through his hair, that gesture he always made when stressed. Okay. Yes. I knew. But Grace, everything else was real. My feelings for you, the life we were building together, that was all genuine. Was it? Because from where I'm sitting, you're a man who was embarrassed by me at that dinner. You called me a girl from Brooklyn like it was shameful. You told your friends I worked for some company nobody knew. Those are your real feelings, Robert. Everything else is performance. I was caught off guard. My mother put me on the spot, and I panicked. You panicked and revealed exactly what you actually think of me. I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshots. But let's talk about what really bothers me. This email from your father, sent 5 months ago. I turned the phone so he could see it. Watched his face as he read William's words. Robert, the Whitmore deal fell through. We're going to be short approximately $40 million in operating capital by end of year. Your engagement to Grace Levine couldn't have come at a better time. Once you're married, we should discuss having her invest in Devon Capital. Her reputation in PE would restore investor confidence. Robert looked like someone had punched him. Grace, that wasn't the plan. Wasn't it? Your father called me 3 days ago. Told me quite directly that marrying you would be mutually beneficial. That I'd be a safety net for the Devon family legacy. I didn't know he was going to do that. But you knew about the financial problems. You knew your family's firm was struggling. You knew they saw me as a solution. I leaned forward. Tell me something, Robert. When did you actually fall in love with me? Was it before or after your mother's research revealed my net worth? That's not fair. Answer the question. He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I don't know. I can't separate what I felt from what I knew you were worth. It all got tangled together. The honesty was devastating. Not because it hurt, I'd already processed that pain, but because it confirmed everything I'd suspected. I'm calling off the wedding. Grace, no. Please. We can work through this. We can go to counseling, figure this out. There's nothing to figure out. You don't love me, Robert. You love what I represent. Financial security for your struggling family. A prestigious career that makes you look good. Assets you could access once we were married without a prenup. That's not true. Which part? Because your father literally admitted the financial security piece. You admitted the prestige piece at the dinner when you were embarrassed I didn't fit your image. And you refused to sign a prenup, which tells me everything about your intentions regarding my assets. Robert's expression shifted from pleading to something harder. You know what? Maybe I did know about your money. Maybe my family did need financial help. But you're not exactly innocent here, Grace. You ran a 2-year experiment on me. You deliberately hid who you were to test whether I was good enough for you. I hid my wealth to see if you'd treat me with basic respect regardless of what I could offer you financially. You failed that test spectacularly. Because the test was rigged from the start. You wanted me to fail. You wanted a reason to feel superior, to prove that everyone's just after your money. His words hit harder than I expected because there was a sliver of truth in them. I had been testing him. I had been waiting for him to fail. But that didn't excuse what he'd done. You're right, I said quietly. I did test you. And you know what I learned? That when given the opportunity to defend me, support me, or stand up for me, you chose your family's approval instead. Every single time. That's not. Your mother made cutting remarks about my industrious career for 2 years. You never once corrected her. Anya called my apartment cozy like it was an insult. You laughed. Your father dismissed my work as some boutique firm nobody knew. You stayed silent. I met his eyes directly. You had countless opportunities to show me who you really were, and you did. You're a man who needs to feel superior to the woman he's with. And when you found out I was more successful than you, you couldn't handle it. Robert's jaw tightened. So what happens now? You just walk away? Cancel everything? I walk away. You can handle canceling the wedding with your family since it was always more their event than mine anyway. The deposits are non-refundable. The plaza, the caterer, the florist, will lose over $200,000. Then you'll lose $200,000. I never wanted the plaza wedding. That was your mother's choice, remember? Grace, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm choosing not to marry someone who sees me as a financial asset rather than a partner. Robert was quiet for a long moment. I watched his expression cycle through emotions. Anger, frustration, resignation. Finally, something that looked almost like relief. You know what the worst part is, he said finally. I think you're right. I think I did love the idea of you more than the actual you. The successful, brilliant woman who made me look good at events. The person who could solve my family's financial problems. I don't think I ever saw you as just Grace. The admission hung between us. It was the most honest thing he'd said in 2 years. Thank you for saying that. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't the person you deserved. I'm sorry too. Sorry I spent 2 years with someone I couldn't trust enough to be honest with. We sat there for another moment, two people who'd wasted 2 years on a relationship built on deception from both sides. Can I ask you something? Robert said. Did you ever actually love me? I thought about it carefully before answering. I loved who I thought you were. The man who seemed content with me as I presented myself. Who didn't need me to be more or less than what I showed him. But that man didn't exist. He was as much a performance as the modest lifestyle I created. Robert nodded slowly. So we both failed the test. I suppose we did. He stood, and I removed the ring from my finger and slid it across the table to him. Tell your mother I'm sorry I couldn't be what your family needed. I will. He paused at the table's edge. For what it's worth, Grace. You're going to make someone very happy someday. Someone who isn't intimidated by your success. Someone who sees all of who you are and loves you for it, not despite it. You too, Robert. I hope you find someone who makes you feel like enough exactly as you are. He walked out of the cafe, and I watched him go. Felt the weight of 2 years lift off my shoulders. There was no dramatic satisfaction, no sense of victory. Just quiet relief that I'd finally stopped pretending. I called Julie from the cafe. It's done. Wedding's off. Thank God. How are you feeling? Honestly? Free. Good. Come stay with me this weekend. We'll drink expensive wine, order obscene amounts of takeout, and remind you why being single and wealthy is actually the best possible situation. I smiled. That sounds perfect. The next 2 weeks were a blur of administrative tasks. Calling guests to inform them the wedding was cancelled. Most were polite, a few were clearly disappointed to miss the social event, and several, mostly women I'd worked with, expressed relief that I'd come to my senses. Patricia Hartwell took me to lunch at her favorite restaurant, the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu because if you needed to ask, you couldn't afford it. I'm proud of you, she said over wine that cost more per glass than most people spent on dinner. It takes courage to walk away from comfort, even when you know it's wrong. I should have seen it earlier. All the signs were there. We see what we're ready to see. You weren't ready to acknowledge that Robert was intimidated by your success until you were forced to confront it directly. His father called me yesterday, I said. Asked if I'd consider investing in Devon Capital as a business decision, separate from the personal relationship. Patricia's eyebrows rose. What did you say? I said I'd review their financials and let them know. Then I spent 3 hours doing due diligence. I smiled. Their portfolio is a disaster. They've made consistently poor investment choices for 5 years. They're hemorrhaging capital and covering it with social connections and reputation. I wouldn't invest $1. Did you tell William that? I sent him a detailed analysis of every mistake they've made in the past 60 months, along with recommendations for restructuring. Free consulting, out of respect for the 2 years I spent with his son. Patricia laughed, the sound rich and genuine. Brutal and generous. I've taught you well. 6 months after calling off the wedding, I was sitting in Patricia's corner office overlooking Madison Avenue when she slid a file across her desk. What's this? I asked. An opportunity. Tech startup in Seattle. Artificial intelligence for medical diagnostics. The founder is brilliant but inexperienced with scaling. They need a lead investor who can provide both capital and strategic guidance. She paused. They're asking for someone to relocate to Seattle for 12 months to oversee the expansion. I opened the file, scanning the financials. The company was called Mediscan AI, founded by a Dr. Joseph Christie who developed an algorithm that could detect early-stage cancers from standard blood work with 93% accuracy. This is incredible, I said, reading through the technical specifications. If this works at scale, it could save millions of lives and generate billions in revenue. I know. Patricia smiled. I'm recommending you as lead on this deal. Full authority to negotiate terms, structure the investment, and oversee implementation. Why me? Because you need a fresh start somewhere that isn't haunted by Robert Devon's mediocrity. Because you're the best acquisitions manager I've ever trained. And because, frankly, you've been working like someone running from something instead of towards something. This gives you a reason to run toward. She wasn't wrong. The past 6 months, I'd buried myself in work even more than usual. 80-hour weeks, every difficult deal, every challenging negotiation. Anything to avoid the quiet moments when I had to confront how much time I'd wasted on a relationship built on mutual deception. Seattle, I said slowly. That's across the country. Exactly. New city, new challenge, new chapter. What do you say? I thought about my life in New York. The apartment I'd chosen for anonymity rather than love. The routines I'd built around avoiding connection. The defensive crouch I'd maintained for years, protecting my wealth by hiding it, protecting my heart by never fully trusting anyone. I say yes. 3 weeks later, I stood in my new apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound, hardwood floors, and enough space that I'd actually had to buy furniture to fill it. Real furniture, not IKEA pieces chosen for their disposability. My first meeting with Dr. Joseph Christie happened at a coffee shop near the Mediscan offices. He was 34, with the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who cared more about his research than his presentation. He ordered black coffee and launched into his pitch before I'd even sat down. The current diagnostic standard for pancreatic cancer requires imaging that usually doesn't happen until patients are symptomatic, which means stage 3 or 4. My algorithm can detect biomarkers 18 months earlier from routine blood work. 18 months, Ms. Levine. That's the difference between a 5% survival rate and an 85% survival rate. His passion was immediate and genuine. This wasn't someone trying to get rich, this was someone trying to save lives who happened to need capital to do it. I've read your research, I said. The science is sound. What you need is operational infrastructure and clinical trial funding. Exactly. But every VC I've pitched wants to rush to market, cut corners on testing, maximize profit margins. They don't understand that this technology could fail spectacularly if we don't do it right. I'm not every VC. I'm recommending a $40 million investment over 3 years. 18 months for expanded clinical trials, 6 months for FDA approval process, 12 months for scaled manufacturing. We do this right, or we don't do it at all. Joseph stared at me. You're serious. I don't waste time on things I'm not serious about. Every other investor wanted proof of concept in 6 months. Every other investor is an idiot. Revolutionary medical technology requires patience and precision. Rushing leads to failure, and failure in this space means people die who shouldn't. I won't be responsible for that. He sat back in his chair, and something shifted in his expression. You actually understand this. I understand that some things are more important than quick returns. I understand that building something meaningful requires time and expertise. And I understand that you're not going to compromise your vision for profit margins. How do you know that? Because if you were that person, you would have already taken one of the other offers. The fact that you're still looking for the right partner tells me everything I need to know about your priorities. Joseph smiled, and it was genuine and a bit surprised. I think we're going to work well together, Ms. Levine. Call me Grace. And I think you're right. Over the following months, I threw myself into the Mediscan project with an intensity that felt different from before. This wasn't escape, this was purpose. Every strategic decision, every operational challenge, every late night reviewing clinical trial data felt like building something that mattered beyond quarterly earnings reports. Joseph and I developed an easy working rhythm. He was brilliant but scattered, prone to getting lost in research while forgetting basic operational necessities. I brought structure, strategy, and the kind of focused execution that turned brilliant ideas into viable companies. 3 months into the project, we were working late in the Mediscan lab, reviewing the latest clinical trial results. The data was promising, the algorithm was performing even better than initial projections. This is going to work, Joseph said, looking up from his computer screen with barely contained excitement. Grace, this is actually going to work. Of course it's going to work. We designed it to work. No, you don't understand. This doesn't just work, it's revolutionary. We're looking at a 96% accuracy rate. That's unheard of for early detection. I looked at the data again, processing the implications. If we can maintain this accuracy through full trials, we're talking about saving hundreds of thousands of lives annually. Maybe millions globally once we scale. We sat there in the quiet lab, the weight of what we were building settling over us. This was why I did what I did. Not for the money, I had more than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. But for moments like this. For the chance to fund something that actually mattered. Can I ask you something? Joseph said, breaking the comfortable silence. Sure. Why did you take this project? Patricia told me you had your pick of deals. You could be anywhere, working on anything. Why a medical diagnostic startup in Seattle? I thought about how to answer. About Robert and the wasted years. About learning that hiding who I was didn't protect me from being hurt, it just guaranteed I'd be hurt by people who didn't deserve to know the real me in the first place. I needed a reminder that not everyone is motivated by money. That some people are trying to build something meaningful instead of just profitable. You're that reminder. Joseph smiled. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. This wouldn't be possible without you. It wouldn't be necessary without you. We're a good team. And we were. Over the next 6 months, Mediscan went from promising startup to industry game changer. The FDA fast-tracked our approval process. Major hospital systems started reaching out about partnerships. Medical journals were calling Joseph for interviews. Through it all, I found myself genuinely happy. Not the careful, controlled happiness I'd maintained in New York, always holding part of myself back. But real, messy, authentic joy in work that mattered. Julie came to visit in month 9, ostensibly to see Seattle but really to check on me. You look different, she said over dinner at a restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay. Different how? Lighter. Less guarded. Like you're actually living instead of just performing life. Is that what I was doing before? Performing? Grace, you've been performing since the day we met at Columbia. The modest clothes, the careful answers about your family, the way you deflect any conversation about money. You were always 3 steps ahead, calculating how much to reveal, what to hide. And now? Now you look like someone who's figured out that hiding isn't the same as protecting yourself. She was right. Seattle had given me distance from my old patterns. I'd started being honest about my wealth when it came up naturally in conversation. Stopped downplaying my accomplishments. Let people see who I actually was instead of a carefully curated version designed to test their motives. And the world hadn't ended. Most people didn't care. The ones who did care, who suddenly got interested when they learned about my net worth, were easy enough to spot and avoid. I heard Robert got engaged, Julie said carefully, watching my face for a reaction. Good for him. You're not upset? Why would I be? We weren't right for each other. He knows it. I know it. I hope he found someone who actually wants what he has to offer. Wow. 6 months ago, you would have had a much sharper response to that. I smiled. 6 months ago, I was still angry. Now I'm just grateful I found out before the wedding instead of after. Julie raised her glass. To narrow escapes and fresh starts. I clinked my glass against hers. To building something real instead of something pretty. 1 year after moving to Seattle, I stood in front of 200 medical professionals at a conference in Boston, presenting Mediscan's Phase 3 clinical trial results. Joseph was beside me, handling the technical details while I covered the business implications. The reception was overwhelming. Hospital systems wanted to pilot the program. Insurance companies wanted to discuss coverage. Investors were calling Patricia, trying to buy into later funding rounds. After the presentation, a woman approached me. She was in her 50s, wearing a doctor's coat with Massachusetts General Hospital credentials. Ms. Levine, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. I wanted to thank you for funding this research. Thank Dr. Christie. It's his algorithm. I know. But it wouldn't exist without your investment. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I was one of the lucky ones. I'm still here. But I lost my sister to the same disease 5 years ago. She was 42. If we'd had this technology then. Her voice caught. You're going to save so many families from what mine went through. I felt something shift in my chest. This was why wealth mattered. Not for the lifestyle it provided or the status it conferred. But for the ability to fund something like this. To turn capital into hope. Thank you for sharing that, I said. I'm sorry about your sister. She would have loved knowing her death contributed to something that could save others. That it wasn't meaningless. After she walked away, Joseph looked at me. You okay? Yeah. Just reminded of why we do this. For Dr. Chen's sister. For all the sisters. All the parents and children and friends who don't have to get that diagnosis anymore. That's worth more than any return on investment. Joseph smiled. Patricia chose well when she sent you to Seattle. I think Seattle chose me. I just finally listened. 2 years after calling off my wedding, I sat in my Seattle apartment, the real apartment I'd bought 6 months ago, the one with the view and the space and the furniture I'd actually chosen because I liked it, and took stock of my life. I was 31. Single. Running the most meaningful project of my career. Making more money than I knew what to do with. And genuinely, authentically happy. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, board meeting next Tuesday. They want to discuss making you partner. Say yes. I stared at the message. Partner at Hartwell Global. It was everything I'd worked toward for a decade. I texted back, I need to think about it. Patricia called immediately. What's there to think about? Whether that's still what I want. Grace Levine, are you telling me you're considering leaving the firm? I'm telling you I'm considering starting my own fund. One focused exclusively on medical technology and biotech. Companies like Mediscan that need patient capital and strategic guidance instead of pressure for quick returns. There was a long pause. Then Patricia laughed. I've been waiting 2 years for you to figure that out. You knew? I knew the moment you told me about Robert that you needed to rebuild your life on your own terms. Not mine, not the firm's, not anyone's expectations but your own. Seattle was just the catalyst. You're not angry? Angry? Grace, I'm proud. You're doing exactly what I did 28 years ago when I left Morgan Stanley to start Hartwell Global. Building something that matters instead of just something profitable. Will you invest? Will I invest in a fund run by the woman I trained who just turned a medical diagnostic startup into a billion-dollar company? Grace, I'll be your first investor. I smiled, feeling something settle in my chest. Certainty. Purpose. The knowledge that I was finally building the life I actually wanted instead of the life I thought I should want. Thank you, Patricia. For everything. Thank yourself. You did the hard work. I just pointed you in the right direction. After we hung up, I stood by my window, looking out over Puget Sound. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and pink. In the distance, ferries moved across the bay, carrying people home. I thought about Grace Levine from 2 years ago. The woman who hid her wealth, tested her fiancé, collected data instead of building connections. The woman who thought control was the same as safety. She'd been right to leave Robert. Wrong about almost everything else. Real safety didn't come from hiding who you were or testing people before trusting them. It came from knowing yourself well enough to recognize when someone saw you clearly and chose you anyway. Or when they didn't, and having the courage to walk away. I'd spent 2 years with someone who couldn't see me because I was too busy hiding. Then I'd spent 2 years in Seattle learning to stop hiding. Learning that the right people didn't need tests or trials or careful revelation. They just needed honesty. My phone buzzed again. Joseph, dinner tomorrow? I have someone I want you to meet. Her name's Anna. She's a genetic researcher at UW. I think you two would really hit it off. I smiled. Joseph had been trying to set me up for months, convinced that I needed to start dating again. I'd resisted, not because I wasn't ready, but because I wasn't sure I wanted to go through the whole dance again. The careful revelation. The testing. The inevitable disappointment. But maybe that was old Grace talking. The woman who thought love required deception and control. New Grace could just show up as herself and see what happened. I texted back, sure. Pick the place. Joseph, Thai place on Capitol Hill. 7 p.m. and Grace? Just be yourself. Anna's not impressed by money. She's impressed by people who do meaningful work. I laughed. Of course Joseph would find someone who shared his values. Someone who measured worth in impact instead of income. See you then, I texted back. I put my phone down and returned to the window. The sun had fully set now, the city lights beginning to twinkle on across the water. My reflection stared back at me from the glass. Grace Levine, 29 years old when this story started, 31 now. Different. Changed. Better. I'd mocked my fiancé at his family's estate. Exposed his lies, his family's desperation, their calculations. I'd walked away from a wedding that would have been beautiful and hollow. I'd rebuilt my life 3,000 miles away in a city that smelled like coffee and rain. And I'd learned the most important lesson of all: the wrong person will make you feel like you need to be less. The right person won't need you to be anything other than exactly who you are. I wasn't sure if Anna would be that person. Maybe she would, maybe she wouldn't. But for the first time in my life, I was willing to find out without armor, without tests, without hiding. Just Grace. Finally, completely, authentically myself. And that felt like enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.